My heart stopped beating the moment Michael grabbed my arm in the church vestibule. His grip was soft, but his eyes were hard as stone. "Mom, please," he whispered, glancing nervously at the pews packed with wealthy strangers. "Don't come up to the altar. Just stay in the back. I don't want Vanessa's family to see you looking so simple." I never thought the happiest day of my son's life would turn out to be the most humiliating day of mine. I still remember that look on his face, tight, controlled, when he stopped me right there in the church hallway, holding his bouquet. He held my arm gently, way too gently for the violence of the words he was about to say. "Mom, please don't go up to the altar. Stay in the back. I don't want Vanessa's family to see you looking so simple." For a split second, I thought I'd heard him wrong. I looked at him, waiting for a smile, a chuckle, anything to soften the blow of what he just said. But nothing came. His face was serious, cold. His voice was steady. Like he had made this decision long before he actually said it out loud. I felt the air get sucked right out of my chest. I had dreamed my whole life of walking him down the aisle, not because I wanted to steal his spotlight, but because that moment was supposed to be the reward for years of sacrifice, of sleepless nights, of tears I cried where no one could see them. But instead of pride, he gifted me shame. Before I go on, I want to invite you to do something special. Hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps me see that you support me and that you're enjoying these stories. Also, drop a comment down below telling me what city you're watching from. Now let's get back to it. I took a deep breath. I smiled at him, even though my soul was crumbling into dust on the inside. I nodded calmly, acting like his words hadn't just speared me through the heart. Then I turned around and walked toward the back of the church, dragging my dignity with me, feeling it unravel with every step I took. From back there, I watched him, my son, looking radiant, walking toward the altar arm in arm with his future wife, Vanessa. That girl with the flawless face and the porcelain smile. Her white dress seemed to glow under the church lights, and everyone looked at her with pure admiration. I looked at her too, trying to convince myself that she made him happy. But when she turned back toward me, just before reaching the altar, I saw something in her eyes I will never forget. Satisfaction. Not the love kind, but the triumph kind. It was the look of someone who had successfully pushed me out of my own place in my son's life. It's a strange thing, isn't it? How you can be surrounded by a crowd of people in a holy place, yet feel colder and more isolated than if you were stranded on an iceberg. You realize that loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about being forgotten by the one person you poured your entire existence into. I stayed silent through the whole ceremony. The priest's words were mixing up with the memories swirling in my head. I saw Michael at 6 years old, running through the backyard with mud all over his jeans. I saw Michael crying the night his father died. I heard Michael promising me that when he grew up, he'd build me a house with a garden and take care of me forever. That little boy didn't exist anymore. Standing in front of me was a man I didn't recognize, a man in a tailored suit with a gold ring and a heart that didn't belong to me anymore. When the ceremony ended, I went up to congratulate the newlyweds. Vanessa gave me a peck on the cheek, dry, like you'd greet a distant acquaintance out of obligation. "Thanks for coming, Mrs. Miller," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mrs. Miller. Not mom, not even mother-in-law. Just Mrs. Miller. Like I was just another name on the guest list. My son, for his part, barely brushed my hand. "We'll talk later, Mom. Later." There was always a later with him ever since he met Vanessa. Later he'd call, later he'd visit, later he'd tell me things. But that later had turned into a never. During the reception, I sat at a table way in the corner with a group of guests I didn't know. Nobody said a word to me. The photographers passed by me over and over, hunting for perfect smiles, but they never once pointed their cameras in my direction. I was invisible. And yet, I saw them all. I saw Vanessa's mother showing off her jewelry. I saw her father toasting with a glass of expensive wine. and I saw my son, laughing with them, trying so hard to look like he was one of them, part of a family that would never fully accept him. "You must be proud," one of the guests said to me, without even looking at my face. I smiled, because if I opened my mouth, I was going to cry. And tears, in a place like this, were a luxury I couldn't afford. I don't remember how long I sat there, watching, swallowing the bitterness with every sip of water. All I know is that at some point, while everyone was dancing and celebrating, an idea started to grow inside me. First, it was a whisper. Then, it became a certainty. And finally, a plan. It wouldn't happen today, not tomorrow either, but the day would come. And when it did, my son would learn what it means to humiliate the person who gave him life. When the party was over, I went to say goodbye. Vanessa was euphoric, surrounded by friends. Michael saw me, but pretended he didn't. It was her who stepped forward, with that fake politeness I knew so well. "Thanks for coming, Mrs. Miller. Everything turned out perfect, didn't it?" I nodded. Yes, everything was unforgettable. "See you soon," she said, giving me a light, dismissive pat on the shoulder. But as I walked out of the ballroom, I stopped at the door and looked back. I looked at my son, at the life I had worked so hard to build. I thought about all the nights I stayed up taking care of him. I thought about the years I spent cleaning other people's houses to pay for his college tuition. Also that, in the end, I didn't even deserve to stand at the front of his wedding. That night, when I got home, I took off my shoes, my makeup, and my smile. I looked in the mirror and saw a tired woman, her face marked by disappointment and the years. But behind those sad eyes, there was something neither Michael nor Vanessa knew about. A sleeping strength. A strength that, once awakened, does not forgive. I sat at my desk and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. I started writing without thinking, guided only by the pain. I didn't know exactly what I would say yet, but I knew when I would say it. The day my son least expected it. And when I was done, no one would ever ask me to stay in the back of anywhere ever again. We tell ourselves that sacrifice is its own reward, don't we? Mothers, I mean. We convince ourselves that being a doormat is just part of the job description. But there comes a moment when the silence stops being noble and starts being deadly. That was the moment I realized. Dignity isn't given to you. You have to take it back. I always thought people didn't change overnight, but I was wrong. Or maybe they don't change. Maybe they just reveal who they always were. When Michael first introduced me to Vanessa, I remember feeling a mix of joy and suspicion. She came to the house dressed in discreet elegance, smelling like freshly cut flowers. She had a polite smile, the kind that looks sincere but doesn't touch the eyes. As soon as she walked in, she hugged me delicately. "Finally, I meet the most important woman in Michael's life," she said, her voice sweet as syrup. I watched her silently. She was beautiful. I couldn't deny that. Straight hair, manicured hands, a steady gaze. Too perfect, I thought. And perfection, when it doesn't have a soul, is usually dangerous. I had prepared that first dinner with so much care. Roast chicken, homemade mashed potatoes, and the apple pie my son had always loved. I wanted Vanessa to feel welcome, but the moment she took the first bite, I saw her lips purse just a tiny bit. "What a homey taste," she commented. It wasn't a compliment, though she hid it well. Michael laughed. "My mom has cooked like this forever." She smiled. "Of course, babe, you can tell." Nobody else caught the comment, but it pricked me like a thorn. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. It was a small crack, and I didn't know it then, but that crack was going to turn into a canyon. The following months were a slow, silent battle that only I could see. Vanessa never confronted me directly. Her war was elegant, meticulous, noiseless. First, she started organizing the family get-togethers. Suddenly, Sunday dinners moved to her house because, according to her, she had more space. Then, Michael's calls started getting spaced out, and when I finally did hear from him, I noticed his tone was distant, distracted. He was always busy. One afternoon, I stopped by without calling first and found the door locked and the lights off. I knocked a few times until Vanessa opened it with a tense smile. Mrs. Miller? What a surprise. Michael isn't here. That's okay. I just came to drop off a pie. Oh, she said, looking at the pie with a mix of disdain and condescension. That's so sweet. But we're actually avoiding homemade desserts now. You know, all that sugar. That was the first time I felt unwelcome in my son's life. But it wouldn't be the last. Over time, Vanessa started having opinions on everything that concerned me. Your mom should really move neighborhoods, Michael would say, thinking I couldn't hear him. That place is so modest. It doesn't match your professional image. Other times it was, don't you think your mom should sell that old house? I'm sure someone would pay good money for it, and she could move closer to us. She always sounded worried, protective, like she was thinking of my well-being, but every word out of her mouth was a seed of distance planted with surgical precision. And Michael let himself be led. He was a good man, but weak when it came to love. He didn't know how to say no. He didn't know how to spot the poison behind the smiles. Or maybe he knew and just preferred not to see it. One night, while I was watching TV, the phone rang. It was him. Mom, Vanessa and I wanted to tell you something, he said enthusiastically. We're thinking about getting married. I sat in silence, smiling alone at the receiver. That is wonderful, son. Yeah, and that's why, well, I wanted to ask you this in person, but I don't want you to take it the wrong way. What is it? Vanessa thinks you should sell the house. She says maintaining it alone is costing you too much. And what do you think? I think she's right. My throat closed up. That house wasn't just walls and shingles. It was his father's life, the echo of his laughter, the place where Michael grew up, but I didn't say anything. I just murmured, if that's what you both think, I'll consider it. When I hung up, I felt like I had just lost the first battle. The next day, Vanessa showed up with coffee and a polite smile. I don't want you to think we're pressuring you, she said, crossing her legs elegantly. We're just thinking about your comfort. I know. You two are very attentive. Besides, she added, the money could really help us with the new apartment. After all, Michael wants us to live nearby. That's when I understood. They didn't want to help me. They wanted to take the little I had left. I smiled. I poured her coffee. And while we talked about trivial things, I made a silent decision. They would never know just how far a wounded mother could go. Months passed. I sold the house because I knew refusing would only pit him against her. The money went fast, like everything that is given without gratitude. Michael promised me he would pay me back something later on, but that later on never arrived. I ended up renting a small apartment. The walls were cold, the silence immense. Sometimes I caught myself talking to my husband's portrait. Do you see what we raised, Frank? I'd ask with a cracking voice. At what point did our destiny get so twisted? Grief is a tricky roommate. It sits in the corner of the room and stares at you while you eat, while you sleep. But after a while, you start to realize that grief isn't just sadness. It's fuel. It burns hot and clean, and if you use it right, it can illuminate the truth you've been too scared to look at. But inside all that pain, something new began to grow. A strange, dangerous calm, a kind of slow fire that tears couldn't put out. The fire of clarity, the understanding that there are wounds that don't heal, but they can be used to create justice. One afternoon, I found an envelope in the mailbox. It was the wedding invitation, an elegant card with gold lettering and my name written in silver ink, Mrs. Linda Miller and guest. And guest, like I wasn't his mother. Like I was just another +1. I opened it and closed it several times, unable to decide if I should feel pride or sorrow. My son was getting married. The same son who used to ask me to fix his tie and kiss his forehead before leaving the house was now asking me to ensure nobody noticed I was his mother. That night, I sat down to write in an old notebook. The words came out on their own, driven by a heart that was broken but lucid. I didn't know yet what I would write for his wedding day, but I knew I would speak. And when I did, no one in that room would forget my voice. because sometimes love stays quiet, and other times, love makes the walls shake. They say you don't know how much a house weighs until you start emptying it. Every object, every picture frame, every scrap of fabric has a hidden soul, a sigh, a story that refuses to be packed away. And that day, as I walked through my old house with trembling hands, I understood that I was burying more than 40 years of my life. I had decided to sell it, not because I wanted to, but out of necessity. Or that's what I kept repeating to myself every time tears blurred my vision. Michael and Vanessa said it was for the best. "A big house just for you is too much work," they insisted. "You'd be more comfortable in a small apartment, no stairs, without so much old stuff." But that old stuff was my history. Every piece of furniture held the echo of my husband, Frank, who had died 12 years ago. Every mark on the wall counted the years Michael grew, measuring his height with a pencil and a grin. And every room held the perfume of days that would never return. The real estate agent watched me impatiently. "Mrs. Miller, remind you the buyers arrive at 4. I nodded without speaking. I looked at the living room one last time. The chandelier hanging from the ceiling was still crooked from the day Michael played football inside the house and broke a window. I had sworn I'd fix it, but I never did. I liked seeing it like that. Imperfect. Honest. Like us. I went to the bedroom and opened the closet. My wedding dress was still there, yellowed, smelling of time. I touched it and smiled. In that moment, I felt a part of me detaching forever. I packed some photographs, my Bible, the wall clock, and a small wooden box where I kept the letters my husband wrote me when he was still a young factory worker. "If the world ever turns its back on you," one of them said, "promise me you won't forget who you are." That sentence resonated inside me like a warning, and although I didn't know it yet, that promise would be the thing to hold me up in the darkest days. When the buyers arrived, everything happened too fast. A young couple, smiling, with 2 restless kids. They seemed happy, and in their happiness there was something cruel. They reminded me of myself when I still had a family that needed me. I signed the papers without saying a word. The pen felt heavy, like I was signing my own disappearance. When the agent handed me the check, I felt a cold, immense void. It wasn't relief and it wasn't sadness. It was something else. It was the sensation of having lost the last place where love had been real. That night, I slept on the floor of the living room, on top of an old blanket. There was no furniture, no noise, no laughter, just the echo of the wind and my breathing. At midnight, I opened my eyes and saw the reflection of the moon coming through the window. I got up and walked barefoot through the empty house. My steps echoed like a goodbye. I went into Michael's room. The walls still had sticky spots from the posters he loved as a kid. I ran my hand over the bed that wasn't there anymore and whispered, "If you knew how much I miss you, son. If you knew how much I'd give for you to look at me with the same eyes as before." But he wasn't the same anymore. Vanessa had filled his head with ideas, that I was an old-fashioned woman, that I should rest, that I didn't understand his new life, and I, in silence, had allowed it. The next day, I moved into the tiny apartment Vanessa had helped pick out. 4th floor, no elevator, gray walls, and a smell of cheap paint. "It's temporary, Mom," Michael said when he dropped the boxes at the door. "We'll look for something better for you later." I smiled at him. "Sure, son." I watched him as he went down the stairs in a rush, checking his phone. Not a hug, not an "I love you," just the obligation to get it done. I closed the door, and for the first time in a long time, I cried without shame. It wasn't a loud or desperate cry. It was a serene, deep cry, the kind of crying that doesn't ask for comfort because it knows there won't be any. The following days were slow, heavy. I struggled to get used to the silence. I didn't know anyone in the building, and the neighbors barely said hello. I spent the afternoons knitting, looking out the window and listening to the laughter drifting up from the park. Sometimes I imagined Michael would show up with flowers, asking for forgiveness. Other times, I imagined Vanessa would get tired of pretending and tell me the truth to my face. Neither of those things happened. One afternoon, going through my papers, I found a copy of the house sale contract. I read it calmly until a line caught my attention. The final transfer of title shall be effective in 6 months, pending completion of the notarized review period. That meant that legally, the house was still in my name. I couldn't help but smile. It was a minor detail, almost invisible, but that detail could turn into a powerful card to play. I put the document in a blue folder and hid it in the back of the closet. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Not because I had recovered anything, but because I had found a reason not to give up. You know, power isn't always about shouting the loudest. Sometimes power is just a piece of paper tucked away in a drawer, waiting for the right moment to breathe. It's the knowledge that you hold the ace of spades while everyone else is playing checkers. Weekends, Michael would stop by to visit for a few minutes, sometimes with Vanessa, sometimes alone. They never stayed long. Vanessa was always in a hurry. Meetings, commitments, dinners with important people. And when they said goodbye, her smile was still the same one from that first dinner. That perfect, hollow, venomous smile. I pretended not to notice, but every gesture, every word of hers was being sketched into my memory. Like an artist who, without rushing, draws the face of her enemy before defeating her. One day, while taking my clothes off the drying rack, I heard my neighbors talking in the hallway. "Did you hear about the reception for the Sterling girls' wedding?" one voice said. "They say it's going to be at the Crystal Ballroom, with more than 200 guests." "Really? And I heard the groom's mother isn't invited to the head table? Imagine the embarrassment." I don't know how, but I knew they were talking about me. My chest tightened, but I didn't say anything. I just closed the door slowly, sat by the window, and breathed. If they knew that, it meant Vanessa had made sure everyone knew it. And in that instant, something shifted inside me. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. I looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize myself. There were gray hairs I used to hide, deeper wrinkles, but also something new. A steady, serene gaze of someone who no longer fears losing because she has already lost what mattered most. I swore to myself I wouldn't cry again. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I had decided to wait for my moment. And when that moment arrived, silence would be my best ally. There is no sadder sound than the mailman dropping an envelope at the door when you already know what's inside. Mine arrived on a cold July morning. The envelope was thick, elegant, with gold lettering and a white ribbon. I recognized it before touching it. "Wedding invitation," it said in the corner. For a second, my hands hesitated. I knew opening it would be like opening a wound, but I did it. The paper smelled of expensive perfume, the kind that announces itself from a distance. In the center, in perfect calligraphy, were the names: Vanessa Sterling and Michael Miller. Below that, the phrase, "with the love and blessing of our families." I stopped at that line. I read it several times. Our families. Such a big word, and yet I wasn't there. I kept reading. Location, the Crystal Ballroom. Date, Saturday, September 15th. And at the end, the phrase that went through me like a knife. "Join us to celebrate this special day. Formal attire, neutral colors, no exceptions." It didn't even surprise me. Vanessa never did anything without calculating it. Even the color of the guest dresses was an elegant way to control, to mark territory, to make it clear who was in charge. I folded the card and left it on the table. I spent the rest of the day trying to ignore it, but as the sun went down, the invitation seemed to shine brighter, as if reminding me, with every reflection, that I had gone from being a mother to being a nuisance in a dress. The next morning, I went downtown to find something to wear. Not out of vanity, but because I needed to prove to myself that I could still walk with my head held high. I walked into a small boutique attended by a kind young woman. "I'm looking for something for a wedding," I told her. "Yours or someone else's?" she asked, smiling. "My son's." Her expression changed just for an instant, but I caught it. That automatic smile froze. "Of course. Something discreet, right? She said quietly. I nodded. She started showing me dresses in shades of gray, beige, dull pastels. Bright colors can be distracting in photos, she explained. The bride's family asked for something elegant, but somber. The bride's family. I tried on a champagne-colored one. It was pretty, but looking in the mirror, I felt like it wasn't me. It looked like the reflection of someone who had left a long time ago. Still, I smiled and said, "This one is fine." It wasn't the dress I wanted, but it was the one they wanted me to wear. And for the first time, I decided to give them what they asked for, because in obedience, sometimes, lies the quietest revenge. Walking back home, I ran into my neighbor Marta, who had watched me living alone in the building for years. "Linda, I heard your son is getting married. What joy!" "Yes, in a few weeks." "And are you going to keep living here after the wedding?" "I don't know," I lied. "We'll see what happens." "Well, enjoy it. A mother always dreams of seeing her son happy." I nodded with a weak smile, but inside I knew that what I would see that day wouldn't be happiness. It would be something else. Something that would hurt, but also liberate. That night, I took the dress out of the bag and hung it in the closet. I looked at it for a long time. It was the color of things that are forgotten, and I promised myself it would be the last time I wore something to please others. Then I opened a drawer and took out my notebook. It was old, brown cover, bent corners. I had used it to write letters to my husband when he was alive, but that night the ink was different. They weren't words of love, but of justice. I started with a sentence that came out on its own, as if someone else were dictating it. This is not a speech to congratulate, but to remember. As I wrote, I felt something organizing itself inside me. Every sentence was an invisible stitch closing a wound. I remembered every sacrifice. The double shifts to pay for his studies, the nights without dinner so he could eat, the times I pretended to be okay so I wouldn't worry him. And I wrote, "A mother's love isn't measured in gifts or appearances. It is measured in everything she keeps quiet, in everything she gives, and in what she keeps giving even when they stop looking at her." When I finished writing, I took a deep breath. I knew those words wouldn't be read that night. Not yet. The right moment would come. And when it did, there would be no fake applause or empty smiles that could drown out my voice. Days passed and the wedding got closer. Michael called me a week before. "Mom, is everything ready for Saturday?" "Yes, son." "Oh, and remember not to wear anything with sparkles or glitter. Vanessa's mom wants everything to look uniform." "Of course." "Oh, and Mom," he paused, "thanks for selling the house. Without that, we wouldn't have been able to pay for the reception." That was the final blow. Not an "I love you," not an "I miss you," just "thanks for the money." I hung up the phone and stared at the wall in silence, but something inside me shifted in that instant. It wasn't sadness. It was a strange peace, almost dangerous. That peace that arrives when you no longer expect anything from anyone. Friday night, I left the dress on the bed and sat by the window. The city was calm. The lights of the buildings shone like distant stars. And I thought about my husband, about how he must be watching me from wherever he was, seeing how our history, the history of a family that started with love and hope, was ending wrapped in lies and appearances. I took the letter I had written and put it in my purse. I added a few more pages. I didn't know if I would read them. I didn't know if I would have the courage, but I felt that destiny had already decided for me. That night, I didn't sleep. And when dawn arrived, I knew that day wouldn't be just another wedding. It would be the beginning of something no one would forget, because there are silences that break only once. And when they do, they shatter entire lives. The wedding day dawned clear, with a sun that seemed to be mocking me. The church bells were ringing as guests arrived in luxury cars with impeccable suits and rehearsed smiles. I got out of the cab in my champagne dress and a small purse containing the only truly valuable thing I had with me, my letter. The photographers were running from one side to the other, capturing laughs, hugs, flashes. No one looked at me, and that, although it hurt, was also a relief. I passed among them like a shadow, greeting with a discreet smile, invisible amidst the glitter and expensive perfume of the others. Inside the church, everything was splendor. White flowers, string music, red carpet. Vanessa entered on her father's arm, radiant, while everyone present sighed. As she passed, the guests stood up, admiring her as if she were a queen, and I, sitting in the last row, watched her calmly. I didn't hate her, at least not in that moment. I only felt a deep sadness, compassion for someone who didn't yet know that life always collects the debts of the soul. Michael was waiting at the front. When she reached the altar, he kissed her on the forehead with tenderness. He was smiling, that smile that used to be mine, that used to light up just seeing me, now belonged to another. And for the first time, I truly understood. He was no longer my son. He was Vanessa's husband. During the ceremony, I struggled to maintain my composure. Every word from the priest fell on me like a distant echo. When they said their vows, I felt something inside me crumbling slowly. It wasn't just the passage of time, nor the loneliness awaiting me after this day. It was the recognition that everything I had given, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, had been forgotten. But I didn't break, because inside the pain was something new. Determination, a calm I hadn't felt in years. When the ceremony ended, the guests applauded enthusiastically. I applauded too, slowly from my corner. Vanessa and Michael walked out holding hands. Someone threw petals. The cameras followed their steps to the limousine waiting outside. And I kept walking behind, in silence, invisible, like just another shadow in their perfect fairy tale. The banquet hall was even more luxurious. Crystal chandeliers, tables decorated with fresh flowers, gleaming glasses. A violinist played in a corner, and the air smelled of expensive wine and empty promises. The guests found their seats according to a list. When I looked for my name, I found it at the very last table, far from the stage, next to a group of elderly people I barely knew. I sat down without saying a word. From there, I could see everything. Vanessa laughing with her friends, Michael hugging his in-laws, the toasts, the speeches, the laughter. I just watched, and the more I saw them, the more convinced I was that this world wasn't mine. One of the waiters approached with a kind smile.
"Wine, ma'am?"
"No, thank you. I prefer water." Maybe he noticed something in my tone, because he looked at me for a few seconds before leaving, and for an instant, I felt that someone, even a stranger, had truly seen me. When they announced the first dance, all the applause was for them. Vanessa moved with elegance, as if she had been born to be admired. My son looked at her with devotion, and I looked at my hands, remembering those nights I used them to cure his fever, to feed him, to hold him when his world was falling apart. Those same hands that now rested on my lap, cold, forgotten. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just waited, because the moment I had been planning with such care hadn't arrived yet. When dinner was served, an elegant woman next to me started a conversation.
"Are you with the groom's family or the bride's?" she asked with feigned kindness.
"The groom's. I'm his mother." Her face changed, uncomfortable.
"Oh, how lovely.
I hadn't seen you in the engagement photos." I smiled. No, I wasn't there. The silence that followed was long, heavy. She looked away and continued eating. And inside, I smiled without joy, because in that silence there was more truth than in the entire ceremony. After dessert, Vanessa's father went up to the stage. "Dear friends," he said with a booming voice, "I want to thank you for joining us on this very special day. To my daughter, my pride, and to Michael, the man who is now part of our family." Everyone applauded. He raised his glass and added, "And to Linda, Michael's mother, we thank you for raising such a wonderful son." The applause returned. I nodded with a polite smile, but the tone he used wasn't gratitude. It was condescension. The way someone thanks a favor they believe is beneath them. And then, while the room was still laughing and toasting, I heard my name. "Linda." It was Vanessa, with her melodious voice. "Why don't you come up to the front to take a picture with us?" Everyone turned to look at me. I smiled. took a deep breath, and walked slowly toward the stage. When I arrived, Vanessa put her arm around me, her expensive perfume invading my senses. "Stand close together, please," the photographer said. "Let the love show." Click. The flash illuminated the moment, and right then I saw the reflection in the lens. Me, smiling with my lips, but with eyes on fire, knowing that that smile would be the last fake one I would offer in my life. Before I continue, tell me in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would do in my place. Don't leave the video, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. That night, when the dancing resumed, I felt something different in the air. A murmur began to run through the tables. Someone asked for the microphone. Vanessa and Michael were distracted, laughing, toasting. No one noticed. Until I stood up. I took the microphone with steady hands. The murmur died down. Only the background music could be heard, slow, distant. "Good evening," I said, and my voice sounded stronger than I imagined. "I am Linda Miller, the groom's mother." All eyes fixed on me. Vanessa dropped her glass. Michael frowned. "I want to take a moment before the toast," I continued. "They say mothers shouldn't steal the spotlight from their children on their wedding day, but tonight I didn't come to steal anything. I came to return something." The silence was total. Every word resonated in the hall like a soft, measured blow. "This is my gift," I said, lifting the letter. "And I hope you are prepared, because there is no pretty wrapping paper that can hide the truth." And then, while everyone looked at me without understanding, I smiled with the calm of someone who has waited a long time to speak. I knew that what came next would not only change that night, but all the nights that followed. Fear is a funny thing. You spend your whole life running from it, letting it dictate where you stand and what you wear. But when you finally stop running and turn around to face it, you realize it's just smoke. And I was done choking on the smoke. I didn't feel fear or trembling hands or vertigo, just a calm so big it seemed foreign, as if instead of living that moment, I was watching it from the outside. The murmur of the room died out. Vanessa looked at me with a mix of bewilderment and disdain. My son, on the other hand, was pale. He knew something was coming. Not the scandal the others imagined, but the truth neither was prepared to hear. "Before starting," I said with a firm voice, "I want to thank you for coming. Not to the wedding, but to this moment, because what you are about to hear is not in the program." Some uncomfortable chuckles escaped among the tables. Vanessa's father shifted in his seat, but I kept going. Many years ago, in this same city, a single woman raised her son with the sweat of her brow. She had no help, no inheritance, no luxuries, only love, and the desire to see him become someone good. The murmurs started to grow. Someone turned on a camera. Vanessa moved uncomfortably, trying to downplay the importance, but I looked directly at her. "That woman," I said, "is me, and that son is the man sitting there today, at that table, celebrating with all of you." The silence fell like a curtain. You couldn't even hear the sound of silverware, only the beating of my own heart. "For years," I continued, "I worked cleaning other people's houses, sewing clothes until dawn, depriving myself of everything so he could study. I gave him everything I had, and I did it with pride, without expecting anything in return. But love, when given without measure, sometimes becomes a trap, because the day that son met money, he became ashamed of his roots." I saw Vanessa lower her gaze. Her father cleared his throat. Michael tried to stand up, but I raised a hand. "No, son. If tonight you dared to tell me not to go up to the altar so no one would see me, then you will have to listen to me now that everyone is looking at me." The audience gasped. A murmur ran through the room. I continued with a steady pulse. "You asked me to sell my house to pay for your reception, and I did it. You asked me to disappear so as not to make your wife uncomfortable, and I did that too. But there is something you forgot, Michael. I didn't sign the final transfer. The house is still in my name." Vanessa's face transformed. She went from bewilderment to fury. Michael put a hand to his face, murmuring something inaudible. "That's right," I said with serenity. "The house where you plan to live, the one you used as collateral for your loans, legally belongs to me. And I want to take this moment to announce that, starting tonight, that house will be donated to the Haven House for Children, the orphanage where I worked for over 20 years. The audience reacted, first with amazement, then with a heavy silence. Even the violinist stopped playing. Vanessa stood up abruptly. "This is insanity!" she screamed. "You can't do that!" I looked at her calmly. "I can, and I already did. Poor people are a discreet mother, right? Well, you will no longer have a mother, nor a house, nor money coming from my hands." Vanessa's father stood up too. "This is unacceptable. You are ruining a wedding." "No," I replied. "I am stopping a lie from growing any further." Michael took a step forward, trembling. "Mom, why are you doing this?" I looked him in the eyes. "Because I love you, son. And true love doesn't let you keep building your life on shame. You didn't just deny me a place at your wedding. You denied me the right to exist in your story." My words hit him harder than any scream. I saw him bow his head, broken, and for an instant I felt pity. But it wasn't a moment for weakness. I took a breath and looked at the audience. "I know many here will judge me. They will say a mother shouldn't do this on her son's most important day. But I assure you something. This wasn't his most important day. This will be the day he learns that a mother is not measured by what she gives, but by what she isn't willing to keep losing." Vanessa tried to approach the microphone. "This is humiliating," she whispered with a trembling voice. "No, dear," I said, with a serenity that disarmed her. "Humiliating was when you made me sit at the back of the church so no one would see me. Humiliating was when you called me Mrs. Miller in front of my future grandchildren because Mom sounded too vulgar to you. Tonight, for the first time, you see me as I am. And believe me, you will never forget it." Someone started to applaud. First it was timid, barely an isolated gesture. Then another and another. In seconds, the entire hall erupted in applause. Not out of cruelty nor mockery, but for the strength of the truth. I stood still, looking at everyone. The applause didn't fill me with pride, only relief, because I had finally let go of all the weight that had been crushing me for years. I left the microphone on the table, turned, and walked toward the exit. In my wake, the silence returned. I only heard my son's voice behind me, choked, desperate. "Mom, wait!" But I didn't wait, because a woman who was invisible for too long, when she finally stands up, never sits down again. I walked out of the hall, and the fresh night air hit my face. The sky was full of stars. I took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged to myself, that my life no longer revolved around someone who had denied me. And as I walked toward the taxi, I knew that wedding would remain in everyone's memory, not for the dress, nor the music, nor the toasts, but because a mother dared to speak, and her voice split the party in two. Underscore, 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 underscore. I woke up to the sound of the phone. I hadn't slept. I spent the whole night awake, watching the flickering light of the street lamps coming through the window, going over every word I had said again and again. I didn't regret it. Not out of pride, but because for the first time in my life I had spoken without fear. The phone kept ringing. I knew who it was before answering. "Mom." Michael's voice was trembling. "Can we talk? Please." For an instant, I thought about hanging up, but motherhood is a chain that doesn't break with humiliation or pain. I sighed. "Come over," I said. "The door will be open." It took him an hour to arrive. When I saw him appear in the doorway, I understood that something in him had changed. It wasn't the expensive suit or the dull look. It was the way he carried the weight of his own regret. He looked like a child again, only with hands stained by his own decisions. "Mom, you don't know what you've done," he said as soon as he crossed the door. "Yes, I do," I replied. "I did what I should have done a long time ago, remind you who I am." He ran his hands over his face,
His eyes were red. Vanessa is furious. Her family canceled the contract on the apartment. They say they don't want anything to do with me. That was to be expected, I said calmly. Families that live on appearances crumble when the lights go out. I just wanted you to be proud of me, he whispered. I looked at him. Proud? Michael, I would have loved you even if you were still selling newspapers on the corner. But you confused pride with ego and love with shame. He sat down, defeated. I didn't want to hurt you. I know, I said softly. But you did. And now you'll have to learn that pain also teaches. There was a long silence, full of things that no longer needed explaining. I watched him, trying to reconcile the boy I raised with the man in front of me. And although it hurt to see him destroyed, something inside me understood that this fall was necessary. Why did you donate the house? He asked finally. Because it wasn't fair for the place where your father and I built our love to end up being the stage for my humiliation. You could have left it to me, Mom. No, I interrupted, because you already had everything except what matters most, gratitude, and a heart that doesn't know how to give thanks doesn't deserve to inherit anything. His eyes filled with tears. I didn't hug him. Not out of cruelty, but because I understood that sometimes early comfort is the enemy of sincere repentance. When the afternoon fell, he left without saying goodbye. I didn't know if he would return, and strangely, that didn't hurt. I had spent a whole lifetime fearing losing him, and yet, only when I let him go did I feel free. I turned on the radio. The local news was already talking about the incident at the wedding of the year. The commentators said it was an act of courage. Others called it an unnecessary scandal. I didn't care what they called it. I knew the truth. It wasn't revenge. It was dignity. 2 days later, Vanessa came to see me. She didn't knock. She just pounded the door with her knuckles, with the desperation of someone who has nothing left to lose. I opened it. She was wearing dark glasses. Her makeup was runny, her pride smashed to pieces. What do you want? I asked. You ruined my life. No, I said, looking at her calmly. I just stripped you naked in front of everyone. Your arrogance ruined your life. Everyone hates me, she continued with a broken voice. My parents cut off my accounts. The guests left before the toast. Michael hasn't even come home. Maybe this way you'll learn what you never wanted to understand, that foundations built on lies sink on their own. Vanessa took off her glasses. Her eyes were red, swollen. Was it necessary to do it in front of everyone? Yes, I answered without hesitation. Because you chose to humiliate me in front of everyone. The difference is that I didn't do it to hurt you, but to free myself. She stayed silent for a moment, looking at the floor. When she looked up again, her gaze had changed. There was no longer hatred, only exhaustion. You know what the worst part is? She asked. That deep down you were right. I know. I saw it in her eyes. It wasn't hate. It was sadness. And that hurt more than anything she said. Her words took me by surprise. For the first time, I saw her as human. Not the haughty young woman from the wedding, but a fragile woman raised to believe that a person's worth is in their last name. And I realized she was also a victim of the same thing that wounded me, the fear of what will people say. I wish I had a mother like you, she murmured before leaving. I didn't answer. I just watched her walk away, stumbling through tears. And for a moment, I felt compassion. Not for what she lost, but for what she never knew how to have. That night, the phone rang again. It was the director of the Haven House. Mrs. Miller, we just received your donation. I don't know how to thank you. With that money, we can expand the shelter and pay for the children's schooling this year. I closed my eyes. Don't thank me, Father. Just make sure that house stays full of laughter. I hung up and stared at the window. For the first time in years, I smiled without sadness, because I understood I hadn't lost anything. I had only stripped myself of what was tying me down. The next day, I went to the neighborhood where my old house was. The workers were already working on repairs. The sign on the door said, Future Home of the Children of Haven House. I approached slowly, touched one of the walls, and whispered, Well done, Frank. Now our house has a purpose again.
The wind moved the broken curtains, and for an instant I swore I heard his voice like a distant echo. I told you, Linda, roots aren't denied, they are honored. That afternoon, back home, I found a note under the door. It was from Michael. It didn't say much, just a sentence written in shaky handwriting. Forgive me, Mom. I want to start over, if there is still time. I sat down, holding the paper in my hands. Tears blurred my vision. I replied to the air, knowing he wouldn't hear me. There is always time, son, but this time the road back is one you'll have to walk yourself. I poured myself a cup of tea, opened the window, and breathed the fresh afternoon air. The world remained the same, but I didn't. My heart, for the first time in decades, was at peace. And while the sun was hiding, I understood that the true gift wasn't the scandal, nor the house, nor the lost money. It was having returned myself to me, because when a mother recovers her voice, there is no silence that can lock her up again. They say that with time, pain fades away. That's not true. Pain stops being a wound and becomes wisdom. It stops being a cry and becomes memory. Over the last 6 months, I've watched my son slowly find his way back. Not in designer suits, but in humility. I visit the children at the shelter, and when they call me Grandma Linda, I realize that love isn't something you beg for. It's something you build where the ground is fertile. Life taught me that dignity isn't pride. It's simply remembering your worth when the world tries to make you forget it. And if you take anything from my story, remember this. True love never asks you to hide who you are. If it does, it isn't love. It's just a shadow, and shadows disappear the moment you turn on the light.